Hey, I'm ZSH Plays, and today we're building a caribou habitat. But before we start, I have to show you this little dude. This is Cedric, our first sea lion pup. I'm glad I made this habitat big enough for breeding because he is absolutely adorable. We'll see some more of the rest of the zoo later, but for now, let's head over to the frozen north. This is where we left the area last week. We made a nice start on the entrance, and today we're going to get the first animals in. We're going to be introducing people to this area with an animal that everybody recognizes, the caribou. They range across the whole north of the world, from Scandinavia and the European Arctic all the way through to the very north of the USA, Canada and the American Arctic. On the American side they're known as caribou, and on the European side they're known as reindeer, but it is the same animal. So that's the space that we need for them. And then over here, I'm just going to put in some placeholders for some guest facilities here. We're going to have like a little restaurant, some gift shops and things like that. Now to keep the caribou in, we need a fence that's at least 1.5 meters tall. I really want to use the new fence from the Barnyard Animal Pack. It's so good to have a natural wooden fence that looks realistic and we don't have to make it ourselves for once. So I want to use this, but it's not quite tall enough. So what we're going to do is extend the bottom of the fence using one of the fence posts that also comes in the pack so that we can get it a little bit taller without really changing the look of it. And then we can place this all the way around the area to make sure the caribou can't escape. Wooden fences like this are really common in zoos, but it's something we've not done a lot of in this zoo because we've been going for a sort of natural look, so there's been lots of mud walls, hidden ditches and things like that. But in this frozen north area, I want to get a lot of the kind of frontier era America, Alaskan architecture in. So we'll be using a lot of wooden fences where the animals will allow it. And then in terms of architecture, we're going to be basing it on the town of Nome in Alaska. So I mentioned it last week, but Nome was founded in 1901 by a Norwegian immigrant, and it has a lot of really beautiful Norwegian style architecture, lots of wooden houses, which were pretty common in America in those days, pretty common these days to be honest. A lot of them are painted red and blue and all sorts of interesting colours. I think in the US a lot of the houses are white, that's quite a popular colour there. But in Norway, they like a lot of different colours, and Nome in Alaska had a lot of that going on back in the early 1900s, which is where I'm taking this inspiration from. So we're going to be building some really cool American/Norwegian style buildings today to house the reindeer, and this is the first one here. We'll get stuck into that building in a second, but one of the most important parts of this area that we want to concentrate on is making sure that everything looks perfect. So we're going to do a bit of landscaping and planting here, so you can see the exit and one of the zoo's car parks in the background. We want to make sure that the pretty modern architecture of that exit and the car park aren't visible when people are in the frozen north. So we're going to do a lot of planting to make sure that most of that view is blocked. We're going to be using some of the ponderosa pines and a few others to do that. Thanks for all your comments on the last episode, by the way, in terms of planting and things like that, helping me out with plant choices. Ponderosa pines apparently grow in pretty hot climates and can be found in fairly southerly parts of America, so this is definitely an appropriate choice. We've got some Korean pines as well. Korea is a fairly warm country. Not sure exactly where in Korea they grow, but they should be fine. We're going to concentrate mainly on those plants for now. We'll get rid of most of the grass in the habitat as well. We've got herbivores in here, so they're going to eat most of the grass if it's in there, so we'll get rid of the vast majority of it. And then we'll move on to the first of our buildings. I'm going to base these on a reference photo of the main street in Nome, because they've got some really unique architecture there. And the wood panelling on the side of the buildings is actually very similar to the barn that we built in the petting paddock. So I'm going to take a side of that barn, and then we're going to take all the wood planks and make them horizontal rather than vertical, but keep these vertical planks that stick out because they are exactly what we need for this building. It's going to make it a little bit easier. So we'll get some horizontal planks in. We'll spin one of them so that we don't have a sort of repeating pattern going up the side of the wall. And once we've got 3 of these lines so they alternate, we'll have a nice group that we can then copy up to form the entirety of the wall. Then we'll put some more of the protruding thinner planks in to get the design that I saw on the reference photos. So we're going to bring this one out a little bit more so we get a nice shadow underneath it. We'll put some concrete in for the base just to make sure that it looks like it would actually stand up. And once we get that done, we'll have a nice piece of barn wall that we can use to make the entire building. There's going to be a really interesting front on this building, which is very particular to sort of early 20th century and 19th century American buildings. We'll get onto that later. And while we finish that off, let's talk a bit more about the animals that we're going to have in this area. Thanks for all your suggestions in the comments on last week's episode. Just to reiterate, the theme for this area is going to be the north of the American continent. So we're talking from the northern states of the United States up through Canada and into Alaska and the Arctic itself. So there are so many animals that live in that area, from more southerly animals like the cougar, which get up to that sort of area, to animals that thrive in that area like the caribou, to animals that only live at the very north of the continents like the Arctic fox and the polar bear. And basically what I'm going to try and do is get as many of those animals as possible into this area. So we've got some kind of wildcard choices like raccoons. I think we should have raccoons in this zoo, seeing as we had a massive photo of one on the front of the zoo for so long. So I'd like to get those in. They do go all the way up to the northern states of the US. Even animals like the red fox, which can live up there, to the more sort of Arctic staples that we're definitely going to have, like the polar bear, which will be the climax to the area. There's just so many to choose from, and we'll try and get as many of them in as possible. One of the pieces we're going to use to build the front of the building is this enormous sign from the Barnyard Animal Pack, which I distinctly remember making a snarky comment about never using when that pack came out. But what do you know? Now we need it. A lot of the American buildings from back in the late 19th and early 20th centuries had this bizarre design. I have no idea why they did this or what sort of feature it served, but you'd have a traditional pitched roof like we've built here, and then on the front of the building you'd have a square or rectangular facade which didn't match the roof. I've got no idea why they did that, but it's a really distinctive look that is used a lot throughout Nome in the time that we're basing this build on. So I definitely want to use it here. And this sign is very fitting for that because it's got that semicircular sort of arch at the top, which those buildings all seem to have. So we're going to use that and do a lot of decorating on it to sit it in with the rest of the building and get a really authentic Alaskan look. The design on the front of the building is slightly different to it as on the sides, so we'll get rid of the pieces that we don't need, and then we're going to start building with some smaller planks because we need a big old door for those caribou to get through, and we also want some windows at the top. These will get some light into the habitat, and they're basically here because they exactly match the reference image that I'm looking at. This was a saloon, I think, originally. Not a caribou habitat. You wouldn't keep your caribou on Main Street. So instead of people coming in here for beer, we're going to have a caribou in here to escape the sun in the hottest parts of the day and then spend the night in here as well. So we'll keep putting these planks in until we've got the windows the way that we wanted it, and then we'll get some glass panes and put those in. This one here is the perfect size. We'll slide this in so it's nestled within those thinner planks, and then we've got ourselves a window that looks really nice. And with the exterior of the first building complete, we can copy it, and now we've got 2 stables for the caribou. You can see that crazy sort of frontage on the buildings. Let's move on to the next stage, which is getting a stream flowing through the habitat. I saw this in a photo of a zoo in Alaska, and to make the stream look like it serves a purpose, it's going to flow right through the habitat, past the entrance, and end in the moat for the lions. We'll come back and finish the stream in a minute, but first I want to add some more details onto this buildings in the form of this sign here. So the original buildings had different signs on the front advertising whether they were a saloon or a bank or a shop or whatever they were. These ones are quite simply going to say Caribou. We're using one of Christina's amazing fonts here. We'll get this lined up nicely, and then we're going to use some of the thinnest planks in the game to form a border for it. We'll copy these planks around. It was a very simple sign, and we're just going to have a square or a rectangle, I guess it is, that surrounds it using these planks here. And then we'll center this so it fits nicely around the sign, get the color right until we've got something that looks really good. Now, I mentioned last week that we're going to have a monorail station in the frozen north, but I've decided it's going to go at the other entrance, not this one. So we're just going to drop one in here really quickly so that we don't forget where it's going to go, and make sure that we factor this into our plans going forward, and then we can get on and finish that stream. Firstly, we're going to dig the terrain down just a tiny bit. It's going to be a very shallow stream, this, so they can wade through it easily. We'll take this up to this end of the habitat. Up here, we're going to have a pipe where the water comes from, like it's from an underground water source, and then we'll fill the water in all the way down to the lion habitat in Africa here. We need a water treatment as well, so we've got another building here that is going to be used for keeper huts and water treatment. We'll put one in there, and then we'll start making the banks of the stream look good. We've got one of the rocks in here, and then we're going to replace it with a mossy rock and bring that down, and if we get the angle just right, we'll have a little sort of line of moss where the rock meets the water. That'll make it look really realistic. And as usual, once we've got one rock that we're happy with, then we can just take this and copy this down the entire length of the stream on both sides until we start sitting it into the landscape. We're going to do a lot of work on the bottom of the stream as well. It won't just be bare rock like it is here. We'll get this down the other end as well so it meets up with the fence. We're going to continue that all the way down to the lion habitat as well. And then it's time for Franchise Masters. I hope you're ready for the longest Franchise Masters ever. This almost became its own video, but I decided to keep it to a little 2-minute tip instead. ahead. So one of the problems that you face all the time when you've got a massive franchise zoo like this, especially when you build it to be realistic rather than the way Planet Zoo wants you to make it, is running out of money. You'll see how little money the zoo pretty much always has every episode. And one of the main ways to combat that is gift shops. The game wants you to place loads and loads of gift shops because that is where the guests will spend the majority of their money. But when you've got this many areas in the zoo, do you have time or even the inclination to design an Australian gift shop, an Amazonian gift shop, an African gift shop, a nocturnal gift shop, a penguin gift shop, etc, etc? There are so many places to put them. So the best way to deal with it is to build a really generic gift shop that you can place anywhere in your zoo. And we're going to do this as a little gift counter. I'm basing this on one I saw in San Diego Zoo, which is a completely wooden construction. It is super generic. You can slot this in anywhere in the zoo. It uses the gift counter rather than the shop, so it's much smaller. We're going to build a really cute little gift counter that we can slot in very easily anywhere in the zoo and get more money in without having to leave a big space for it or come up with a new design every time or anything like that. We're going to make one perfect gift counter and drop that in anywhere we like. Now we have these pieces from the gift shop update. Things like this are so much easier to build. I love the tote bags and the t-shirts. We'll put a little shelf here and we'll get some mugs and a puzzle and some posters on it. You can just go crazy with details. We need a generic name as well, and souvenirs is pretty much the worst pun I can think of. We can put that in anywhere in the zoo. It's going to slot in nicely. We can stick one here on this path past Madagascar. Looks great here as well. And any financial problems you have can pretty much be solved with enough of these. Back to the habitat, let's get some foliage in. So this habitat is basically my own design, but I wanted to make sure it was grounded in reality. So I looked at the caribou habitat at San Diego Zoo. Obviously a very similar climate to what we would have here. And there were a few patches of nice green grass in the habitat, and then quite a lot of it on the sort of externals of the habitat where the guests would be. So we're going to replicate that here. So we've got a few patches of grass in the habitat, and then slightly more on this side of the little stream, and then loads more on the actual guest path where the caribou won't be able to get to. And one of the problems you can have when you're trying to make a habitat that doesn't have loads of grass in it is the terrain looks really boring when you've just got loads of sort of dirt texture everywhere. So we're going to use some sunken rocks to make it a lot more exciting. We're going to get loads of these rocks and have them just poking through the ground, get random rotation on, and place these so they join the stream onto the main part of the habitat, and then do the same thing at the back of the habitat with the rocks slightly higher. It just gives a really nice texture to the ground and also provides a bit of height variation as well, which makes things look more exciting. I made a little custom water feeder, but unfortunately due to the hitboxes it doesn't work, so you won't see that in the end cinematic. We just end up with the basic water tap, and we'll continue the rocks along to meet up with that gate there. That gate will be open in the final build so that the keepers and the caribou can get in and out of the habitat. Let's take a look at what we've got so far. That's starting to look really nice. We just need some final details on it now. We're going to drop this rustic floor piece into the stream and then replace the basic rock texture at the bottom with this. So we'll get this into the right position, and then we can recolor it so it looks more like it's underwater. We're going to cover the whole bottom of the stream with this, and it'll just be visible in the center of the stream and make things look a lot more interesting. And then we'll make sure it joins onto the edges really nicely with some fake rocks that are again colored to exactly the right color to match up with everything else. Now, in keeping with us wanting to make this the best area in the zoo, we're going to go in and do some tiny little details to finish this habitat off before we call it finished. So we're going to put a little nettle in this tiny gap between the rocks there. And then we're going to get some more rocks just to make this terrain even more interesting. Just a few little lines of rocks here using some smaller rocks. We're going to sink some periwinkle leaves into the ground just to add a tiny bit of ground cover. Get some little plants next to these trees. We've put the tree protector from the porcupine habitat in there as well. Put some hay feeders on the side of the building here using some of the pieces from the Barnyard Animal Pack. Then I'm going to sink some plants in to make that hay on the floor look even more realistic. And then we're going to dress up the edges of the habitat with some of the new hedges and a load more buffalo grass. You can see I've actually covered the back of the lion habitat as well with some more wood that looks like the wood in the stables. And then the final thing that we're going to do is make the source of the little stream that flows through the habitat. So we've got this, I think this is a classic tree protector from the base game, and we're going to rotate this on top of itself loads of times so we get a really interesting metal pipe that the water can come out of and flow down into the stream. So once we've created this, we're going to drag this and put it here in the join between the water and the terrain, and then we'll cover up the gaps with some small faux rocks and just keep placing these in until we've got a really realistic looking pile of rocks here that the pipe can come out from. And this is really going to make it look like the water is like an underground water source and is coming out here into the stream. And then the last thing to do is get some water effects on it so we can actually see water coming out of the pipe and flowing down the stream. And that is the habitat done. Let's take a look at it. At the entrance to the frozen north, there's a map that shows where every animal in this area lives on the planet. So we've added our first animal, the caribou. Let's check out where they live. Here's the habitat. It's really up close to the mammoth or semi-mammoth statue there. So it's the first thing that the guests are going to see. I wanted an animal that all the guests would recognise, but not one of the big heavy hitters that's going to come later on in the area. I really like how this habitat looks, especially the water feature. I think that's my favourite part. There's the stream. You can see that they can just walk across there. Provides a nice bit of enrichment for them and looks pretty cool as well. We'll get an aerial view in and you can get a better view of these buildings with the signs and the crazy frontage that we built. And here's the view from the other end. There's the gate. And they're coming to eat some food here, which the keeper's just thrown on the floor. Not sure why he's not using the feeder. I think this might be the first traditional sort of hoofstock habitat in the zoo where you're just looking at animals through a fence. It was a lot of fun to build. I really hope you guys like it. Still pretty impressive, I think, with all the buildings in the background and all the foliage and the rockwork. I am very happy with it. Let's take a look at where we started today. And this is where we are now. Great to see this area coming together already. Next week, we're going to be putting, I hope, another habitat in for a slightly more impressive animal. Big news as well, we filled the second side of the Explorers Club monolith, and we are now on to side 3. Thank you so much as always to everyone who's joined, and thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you again next week for some more Planet Zoo.